We're diving deep into something today that I think you'll find really fascinating. It's called the Abilene Paradox.
And it can really trip up even the smartest groups.
Yeah, groups can make bad decisions even when everyone has good intentions. It's all about this weird dynamic where nobody wants to do something,
But they think everyone else does.
so they all end up going along with it.
It's like the silent pressure to conform.
And the outcome is something that nobody actually wanted.
Exactly. And what's even crazier is...
It's named after a real story. A family trip to Abilene, Texas.
Imagine a scorching hot summer day.
Oh,
Right. Everyone's just trying to relax.
pretty cool.
Exactly. And then out of nowhere, someone suggests driving 50 miles to Abilene for dinner.
In that heat. Oh man, I feel bad for them already.
But here's the kicker. Nobody actually wants to go.
No?
Nope. The wife thinks her husband wants to go.
Yeah.
The husband thinks his mother-in-law is eager, and so on.
So it's all based on assumptions.
Exactly. Each person assumes they're the only one who doesn't want to go, so they voice agreement.
To keep the peace.
Kind of. They're trying to be agreeable and end up creating this illusion of consensus.
Oh man. I can totally relate. I've been in situations where I felt like I had to just go along with the group even when I had doubts.
And that's the heart of the Abilene Paradox. It's not about open disagreement. People are trying to be team players.
But they end up supporting decisions that are totally against what they actually want.
Exactly.
So it's this like management of agreement that can really backfire.
Absolutely. It's much more subtle than just straightforward conflict.
And how is this different from groupthink? I feel like I've heard that term used in similar situations.
You're right. Those terms often get mixed up, but there's a key difference.
Okay, throwing it on it.
Groupthink is when individuals twist their own beliefs.
To fit in.
Exactly, to fit in with what they think the group believes.
So they convince themselves that they actually want to go to Abilene, even though they hate the heat,
Yeah, something like that.
but with the Abilene Paradox.
It's more about misunderstanding everyone else's wants.
So I think everyone else wants to go to Abilene, but it's not about me changing my own mind.
It's tricky to spot in real life.
It really is, but the implications are huge, right?
Absolutely. Jerry Harvey, the guy who came up with the perm, identified 5 key parts to this paradox.
5.
Yep, 5. First, there's this tricky thing called mutual agreement. The group might all agree that the current situation isn't great.
What?
They're actually okay with it compared to what they think the alternatives might be.
So they haven't really thought it through.
Right. It's like agreeing to move to a new city without thinking about leaving your friends and family behind.
Ouch, yeah. I can see that.
And this is where the second part comes in. Ineffective communication. Everyone's making assumptions. People are expressing support because they think that's what everyone else wants.
So it just reinforces the idea that any individual doubts are probably wrong.
Exactly. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that leads us to the third part.
Okay, what's number 3?
It's the vocalization of group sentiment. All those inaccurate assumptions and misreadings.
Yeah.
Well, they turn into a false consensus. The group seems unified, but it's all based on unspoken and misinterpreted desires.
Wow, so there's this appearance of agreement, but underneath, it's a mess of unspoken dissent and misunderstanding.
Got it.
No wonder groups make bad decisions.
Mm.
So what happens after this Abilene trip?
That's when reflections come into play. It's the fourth component.
Okay.
People start to wonder, why did we do that? They try to justify a decision that isn't working out.
Blaming the leader. Or the circumstances.
Maybe anything but that faulty communication.
That's got to be frustrating. Feeling
It-
tricked into something even though you were part of the problem.
It is. And then there's fallout, especially for the leader. That's the fifth component. Defeat.
The leader takes the hit.
Often, yeah. Even if they were just as hesitant as everyone else.
They feel defeated.
And they try to avoid similar situations in the future.
Wow. So this paradox can lead to bad decisions and hesitant leadership. That's a pretty sobering thought.
It is.
But for those of us who are really committed to growing, to making better decisions both individually and in groups, what can we do? What are some red flags that might signal the Abilene Paradox is at play?
It might surprise you, but some seemingly positive qualities can actually contribute to the problem.
Really? Like what?
Well, take leaders who are publicly really confident, unafraid of the unknown.
Okay, I see that. Sometimes that confidence can mask a go-along attitude.
Exactly. They push forward not because they believe in it, but because they're afraid to admit they don't have all the answers.
Interesting. And I bet a group that avoids conflict at all costs could also be a breeding ground for this.
Absolutely. It seems harmonious, but suppressing debate stifles diverse opinions.
and makes it seem like everyone agrees.
You got it.
So healthy debate is actually a good thing.
It can be, because it brings those hidden reservations out in the open. And ironically, even strong leadership and a strong company culture can contribute to this problem.
I can see that. When everyone's focused on following the leader or fitting in, they may not want to speak up.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance between respecting authority and feeling free to express your own view. And this is where diversity, or the lack of it, comes into play.
How so?
Homogeneous groups, they're more prone to conformity.
Because everyone comes from the same background, it's easy to assume everyone thinks alike.
Exactly. And that's not always the case.
So you need those diverse viewpoints to challenge assumptions.
Yes. So a work environment where management prioritizes avoiding conflict over making effective decisions.
That sounds like a recipe for the Abilene Paradox.
It is. It creates a climate where people are afraid to speak up.
Even if they see a problem.
Especially then. And another factor can be those messiah figures.
You mean like the experts?
Right. Those individuals who everyone sees as having all the answers.
It's easy to defer to them when you're facing a tough problem.
It is. But that reliance on expertise can stop others from contributing.
So everyone's waiting for someone else to save the day.
Yeah, instead of realizing they can help make the right decision. And this is connected to something called the spiral of silence.
What's that?
It's when people hold back their opinions because they think they're in the minority.
So they stay silent, even if they have serious concerns.
And their silence reinforces the false consensus. It can be dangerous.
This is fascinating and a little scary.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important to encourage honest and open communication.
Absolutely. But before we get into how to create that kind of environment, there's something I'm curious about.
What's that?
We've talked about how avoiding conflict contributes to this paradox, but what about people who just naturally don't like conflict, who genuinely want everyone to get along? Are they more susceptible to this?
That's a good question. You'd think people who value harmony would be more sensitive to when others aren't happy.
It's not that they're not sensitive to it, it's that they put the group's needs above their own.
So they hesitate to speak up because they don't want to cause a problem.
Even if it means going along with something they don't agree with.
That's a good point. Even good intentions can backfire if you don't communicate. This makes me think of some of those big public screw-ups, like Watergate.
You're thinking along the right lines. The Abilene Paradox has been used to analyze those kinds of situations.
Really, Watergate was huge. How does this apply to something that big?
Well, many of the people involved in the cover-up said they had doubts about the decisions.
But they didn't say anything.
Nope. They felt pressure to go along with the group. They were afraid of the consequences of speaking up.
So even in a high-stakes situation like that, the fear of rocking the boat was stronger than their own judgment.
It can be, yeah. And it can lead to really bad outcomes. It makes you wonder how many other bad decisions have been made because of this.
It does. So it's crucial to understand this paradox.
For leaders, for sure. But for anyone who works in a group,
Because when you're aware of it,
you can start to recognize those subtle signs. Those moments of hesitation and unspoken disagreement.
and hopefully steer the group in a better direction. This has been really insightful. It's amazing how this simple concept can explain such complex group behavior. But we've identified the problem.
Right.
What are the solutions? How do we break this cycle of silence and avoid those trips to Abilene?
That's a great question and a perfect place to start our next conversation. We're going to explore some practical strategies to recognize and overcome the Abilene Paradox in our everyday lives.
Okay, so we've dug into this Abilene Paradox thing.
And how it can really mess things up for groups.
Even when everyone's trying to do the right thing.
Right, those good intentions can really backfire.
But just knowing about it isn't enough, is it? How do we actually use this knowledge to make better decisions?
You're absolutely right. Recognizing the paradox is just the first step.
What comes next?
Putting it into action. And one of the best ways to do that is to really cultivate a culture of open communication within your groups.
I like it. Making it a safe space for people to actually say what they think.
Yeah, where people feel comfortable sharing their opinions, even if they're different from everyone else's.
That's a nice idea. But how do we make that happen in real life?
It takes effort from everyone, for sure.
Especially from the leaders, I bet.
Definitely. One important thing is to shift the focus away from always looking for agreement
Okay.
and move towards actively encouraging different perspectives and even disagreements.
Interesting. So instead of saying, does everyone agree with this plan?
Which kind of sets everyone up to just say yes.
Even if they're not so sure.
Right. You want to ask questions that get people thinking critically and voicing their concerns.
I see. So you're saying we should be asking things like,
What are some potential problems with this plan? Or are there other ways to do this that we haven't thought of yet?
yeah, I like that. It shows that disagreement isn't a bad thing. It's actually valuable.
Exactly. You're giving people permission to think for themselves and share their honest opinions.
Even if it goes against what everyone else seems to be thinking.
Right. And it's also super important to directly ask for those different opinions.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Sometimes people don't speak up because they don't want to seem negative or cause trouble.
Yeah, they don't want to rock the boat.
But when you specifically ask for those different viewpoints,
It makes it okay to disagree.
it creates a space for those doubts to come out and be addressed.
I like that. It's like you're saying, hey, we know there might be other opinions out there and we really want to hear them. It takes away that fear of speaking up.
Exactly. And it's not just about asking the right questions.
What else is there?
It's about how you listen to the answers.
Ah, that makes sense. Especially when those answers challenge your own assumptions.
Right. Active listening is a huge part of this whole thing.
Being a good listener.
Yes. When someone does speak up with a different view, even if you don't agree,
Don't interrupt.
right, don't dismiss them or get defensive. Try to really understand their perspective.
Even if it's hard.
Even then, ask clarifying questions, make sure you're understanding them correctly,
Don't just brush them off.
and let them know you appreciate their contribution to the discussion,
Okay, so it's about creating a space where people feel heard and respected.
even if they don't agree with the majority.
And that builds trust and encourages more open communication. What else can we do to avoid those silent trips to Abilene?
Another good technique is to break down those big decisions into smaller steps.
Bite-sized pieces.
Kind of, instead of trying to make one massive decision all at once.
You look for ways to test your assumptions.
And gather more information as you go,
So instead of that huge family trip to Abilene,
right?
maybe they could have started with a smaller outing, like a picnic closer to home,
Exactly. That way they could have seen how everyone really felt about spending time together.
without committing to that long drive.
Right. And by breaking things down into smaller, less intimidating steps,
It feels less risky.
it creates more opportunities for people to voice their concerns before things go too far.
And it takes the pressure off, too.
Right. If people know a decision isn't final, they're more likely to speak their minds.
Good point. And what about when there's a real power dynamic in the group? Like a strong leader or a culture of not rocking the boat?
That's where anonymous feedback can be really helpful.
Ah, like a suggestion box.
Exactly. Or online surveys, or even just writing anonymous notes.
So people can express themselves without worrying about being judged.
Exactly. It can give
Yeah.
you some really valuable insights.
And prevent the group from making a decision that no one really wants.
That's the goal. This is all super helpful, but let's be honest. Sometimes we find ourselves in situations where, despite our best efforts,
The Abilene Paradox is already happening.
it happens. The decision's been made, or the group's already heading down the wrong path.
Can you turn things around at that point?
You can. It takes courage, especially when everyone seems to be in agreement.
But speaking up is key, right?
It is, even if it feels uncomfortable. You might not be the only one who has doubts.
Maybe someone else is just waiting for someone else to speak up first.
It's possible. Your voice could be the thing that gets others to rethink their assumptions.
I admire people who can do that. It can be scary to go against the grain, especially when you feel like you're the only one who sees things differently.
It can be. But sometimes speaking up can have a ripple effect.
Others might feel empowered to do the same.
It gives them permission to share their own concerns.
So how do you voice those disagreements effectively without shutting down the conversation or starting a fight?
One way is to frame your concerns as questions instead of accusations.
Interesting.
So instead of saying, I don't think this is a good idea, which can sound confrontational,
Right.
try asking, what are some of the risks involved with this approach? Or have we considered all the other options before deciding on this one?
Oh, that's clever. It's not about attacking the decision. It's about inviting more discussion.
Exactly. And remember, it's not always about trying to change everyone's mind.
Sometimes just expressing your doubts is enough.
Right. It can plant a seed, get others to start questioning things.
So even if you can't stop the train to Abilene, you can at least slow it down a little bit.
That's a good way to put it. And even if the group still goes ahead with the decision,
At least you spoke up
you've been honest with yourself.
and maybe avoided some regret later on.
Exactly. It's about staying true to your own judgment, even when there's group pressure.
I like that. So speaking up can actually help the group avoid a decision that no one really wants.
Sometimes, yeah. And remember, the Abilene Paradox feeds on assumptions and unset expectations.
Right.
So by just asking clarifying questions and making sure everyone's on the same page.
You can bring those hidden assumptions to the surface.
And get the group back to a place of genuine agreement.
This is so helpful. It's like a whole new toolkit for understanding how groups work
It is.
and making sure we're all moving in a direction that truly benefits everyone.
Exactly. And as we've been talking, I keep thinking about how this all connects back to personal growth.
Oh, me too.
The Abilene Paradox isn't just about better decisions, it's about becoming more self-aware
Understanding our role in the group
and learning to trust our own intuition.
and to speak our truth, even when it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. Those are such important lessons for anyone who wants to grow and make a positive difference in the world.
Because so much of that change happens in groups.
Right. Absolutely. And the better we are at understanding how groups work,
The more positive impact we can have.
and sometimes the bravest thing you can do
The thing that sparks the most change.
is to simply raise your hand and say, wait a minute, are we sure about this?
That takes guts.
It does. It's about questioning assumptions, being open to different opinions.
And advocating for what you believe is right, even when the group seems to be going in a different direction.
Well said. This has been such a great discussion. I feel like I'm way better equipped to deal with these group dynamics now.
Me too. It's been really eye-opening.
And I hope our listeners feel the same way.
I hope so. And remember, the next time you're in a group situation,
Take a minute to check in with your gut.
what does your intuition tell you?
Ask yourself, are we all really on board here, or are we headed for Abilene?
That's a question we should all be asking ourselves more often. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. It's been fantastic.
It's been pleasure.
And to our amazing listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah.
Keep learning, keep growing, and keep speaking your truth. You know what's interesting about this Abilene Paradox? It's not just those big decisions at work. It's everyday stuff, too.
Oh, yeah. Choosing where to eat with friends or what movie to watch as a family.
Exactly.
Little things.
The Abilene Paradox can really sneak up on you anywhere. That's why being aware of it is so important.
And practicing that open communication.
Yes, and active listening. It's not just for the office. It's a skill you can use everywhere.
Totally. It's like working out a muscle, right?
I like that. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
So true. Even in casual settings, don't be afraid to check in, ask those clarifying questions.
A simple, is everyone good with pizza or are we feeling something else? Can make all the difference. Sometimes we try to be so easygoing that we end up somewhere nobody wants to be. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Abilene Paradox,
Right.
what's the one thing you want listeners to take away from this?
I think it's this. Never underestimate the power of your voice. You might feel like you're the only one who's unsure, but you're probably not. And by speaking up, you might just be saving the group from a big mistake.
That's powerful. And it reminds me that growth isn't just about knowing stuff. It's about actually using what you know in real life.
Absolutely, even when it feels uncomfortable.
It's about trusting your own judgment, saying what you really think, and standing up for what you believe in.
Right, even when the group seems to be going in a totally different direction.
And you never know, you might inspire others to do the same. Speaking up can create a ripple effect.
It gives others permission to share their own views.
And that leads to a better decision in the end. This has been such an insightful conversation.
It has been.
I feel so much better equipped to handle those tricky group dynamics now.
Me too.
I hope our listeners feel the same way.
I hope so too.
And remember, next time you're in a group,
Take a moment to listen to your gut feeling.
ask yourself,
Are we all truly on board here, or are we heading down that road to Abilene?
such a good question. We should all be asking ourselves that more often. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us today. It's been great having you here.
My pleasure. It's been fun.
And to our incredible listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep speaking your truth.